I just wrapped up one of the most honest conversations we've ever had on the podcast. I'm talking to Oren Soffer, the co-cinematographer behind The Creator. Now, you probably know him for disrupting Hollywood by shooting a $70 million sci-fi movie on a Sony FX3.
What we did was very risky.
But today, we went way deeper than cameras.
Humans, at the end of the day, seek connection with other humans. And this has always been true.
Oren doesn't hold back on generative AI. We're talking about why he believes that public video models like Sora are ontologically evil and filling the internet with slop.
I do believe that these models are kind of ontologically evil. Like, they're purely malignant forces. So I understand why people have this reaction to them, because they serve no positive purpose to society whatsoever.
While he also shares where generative AI might be useful in filmmaking and not disruptive to the creative process, he shares an interesting theory why the AI bubble might be about to burst.
Like, they're just going to be the last one standing. That's what, when the bubble pops, it's not that AI goes away.
If you're really worried about the future of human creativity, you need to hear or see this episode. Let's dive in.
This is Focus Check, the weekly CineTech podcast.
Welcome to this special episode of CineD Focus Check. It is my honor to welcome Oren Soffer on the podcast. How are you doing?
I'm good. Glad to be back and to speak with you again.
Yes, exactly. You said again, and that's just to mention for people who haven't seen that interview. We actually spoke about your work with the GFX Eterna 55 in person when we met each other just before IBC at a special Fujifilm event in Amsterdam last September, where you shot a very nice narrative short film to showcase the capabilities of that new camera. It's called OK, and it's, a good chunk of it is online. I think not the whole thing. But that interview is on our YouTube channel. We're going to put the link in the show notes for those of you who haven't seen it. So we are not going to open that can of worms again and talk about the GFX Eterna 55. I think we've got that covered. But the reason why I reached out to you to ask for like a long form interview with you is your position on AI specifically, because I've seen a lot of the comments you made on Instagram specifically about the use of generative AI, and you're quite vocal about it, and I like that. And also how that all plays in with where you are in your career and, like how you are using technology. But maybe before we get into all of this, you want to give a brief introduction of how you got into filmmaking in the first place, and what movies and what techniques you were brought up with.
Sure. Yeah. If anyone is unfamiliar with me and my work, I'm a cinematographer based in the US, and I work mainly in narrative and commercial filmmaking. So I've shot a number of narrative feature films, including The Creator, probably what most people would know me from, which I was the co-cinematographer on with Greg Fraser. And I've also shot many commercials and music videos. And I came up at a very specific time. I think any filmmaker who's around the same age would probably relate to this timeline, which is, I had a very deep love of films and movies when I was a kid, and then came up in the 2000s with access to very early digital technology that was quite crappy. So early tape, DV cameras, even before DV cameras, camcorders, and then eventually mini DV. That was sort of what I got started with. And then around 2007, 2008, DSLRs showed up, and that was a big revolution, the 5D and 7D and that kind of thing. I had a T2i. I couldn't afford a 5D. So I had a Rebel T2i. That was my DSLR that I shot a lot of video on. And then this was all right on the cusp of the cinema digital revolution. So the Red 1, and then eventually the Arri Alexa and the other Reds all came a few years later. And this was right around when I was in film school. So as I kind of went into the professional world, that dovetailed with the digital revolution. So I learned a lot on film in my formal education, but sort of sat right on that technological transition, especially on the before side. But yeah, definitely very different, I think, nowadays in terms of what people have access to in terms of the tools. But yeah, that I think maybe is some good context to kind of situate in terms of my background and what tools I came up learning on and kind of getting exposed to.
I can totally empathize with that, because I think we're about the same age, and it's almost the similar story for me. Of course, I didn't have a high-end cinematography career in that sense, but I also was brought up with a T2i. That also was my 5D Mark II. It was called 550D over here in Europe, but it's the same camera. And
Yes.
when I was done with film school, I bought a Sony EX3, which is this tiny sensor camera. I used it with
Oh yeah,
35.
we had those.
Yeah, I used it with 35 millimeter adapters, but then literally
With the latest adapter. Yep,
exactly.
Yep, we did the same thing.
Exactly.
Oh yeah.
But then a year later, the 5D was there and the T2i, and actually I showed up on my small commercial shoots with both of these cameras, just to pretend for the client that, I have a big camera, but in reality, I think 90% of what I actually used for the edit ended up being from the T2i, and they never knew. So I think at that time, people didn't take a lot of people seriously that were filming with small cameras that were still very much perceived as photo-only cameras, right?
Yeah, yes, it was weird. I mean, I think I mostly used the DSLRs early on in film school, and I think people were excited to have them. It was kind of it was the first real kind of democratization of filmmaking tools that gave aspiring filmmakers and new filmmakers a tool that, for the first time, unlike all the mini DVs and the EX3s, the latest, all this stuff, it gave filmmakers a tool that was affordable, that looked like cinema. Well, or at least it looked close. It wasn't perfect. I mean, there were a lot of technical limitations in terms of the dynamic range and the codec. And, if you go back and look at some of that early stuff, it's very cringy. The shallow depth of field and the color grade and it was very early days with digital. So I think we really didn't know what we were doing, but it really was the first time you had a sensor that was similar in size to Super 35. So you had an image that looked, for the first time, close to cinema in an affordable camera. By that point, the Red One was already out. The Thompson Viper, of course, the Sony, the Sony Genesis and the Panavision Genesis and the Sony equivalent. All of those were already out. So those were the sort of early generation of high-end cinema digital cameras, but those were inaccessible to young filmmakers. Those were like $200,000 high-end cinema cameras. And even in film school, we did not have access to those cameras. But some kids showed up with a 7D, or a T2i. So that was kind of for the first time. So we were all really excited about it. And I think I wasn't really doing client work or anything professional at that point. We were just messing around, with fellow students. And then I think when I graduated from film school, doing kind of lower budget stuff, I think people were fine. If you showed up with a 5D, I think that was actually kind of expected for a while, at least for a certain budget level of project, at least for a few years until the Alexa Mini came around. I feel like that's when maybe the expectation level went up a little bit.
Yeah.
But before that, it was either had a Red or a 5D, I think, for a while.
I also found it funny that for such a long time, the perception of high-end production was always that you need a big camera. And I remember specifically a conversation I had with at the I think it was BVE Expo in London with the then product manager of the Alexa Mini. That was just announced at this tiny show, and they didn't really market that as something that would essentially replace the larger Alexas at the time.
No.
They were really thinking that would be like the drone camera. And I remember talking to, I think his name is Michael Jonas. He's not with Ari anymore, but he's still active. Like he's very, he basically designed that camera. And I asked him, like, who do you think this camera is for? Because everybody's going to want that. Like nobody will want to use a bigger Alexa anymore. And then he's like, nah, really? No, I don't think so. I think this is just for drones and gimbals. And I was like, no, this is like, no, just because you're shooting high end, you don't want a big, heavy, inflexible camera. And that's also why they put those weird, like the mounting on the Alexa Mini is like, you can't actually mount it on a tripod because it has like 4 holes at the bottom. So you need to rig it up in order to be able to actually put a normal tripod plate on it, because they never thought about putting it on a tripod. So.
I remember exactly this moment when the camera came out and how they marketed it as a camera for gimbals and drones. And I remember all of that because it was supposed to be the evolution of the Alexa M, which was the extension for the, this was a precursor to the Redis Rialto many years before. It was the sensor extension for the full body Alexa. And then they said, well, we can create a small body version of the Alexa that's just for drones and gimbals. And every single person, I think at the time, told them everybody's going to want to use this version, not the full body version.
But
and lo and behold,
it's like, I mean, now everything is smaller cameras, and you're the perfect example. I mean, you're of course you kind of pivoted to something that I think a lot of us DSLR mirrorless filmmakers who were brought up with these cameras were inspiring to. You literally made the jump to big Hollywood. And just tell me a little bit about that story. How did the relationship with Greg Fraser come about, and how did you end up working on that film?
Yeah, I mean, briefly, since I've talked about this before, so if people want the full story, they can seek this out. But I mean, I met Greg many years ago, and we developed a working relationship that's lasted over a few projects. And he called me for this because of his existing relationship with Gareth Edwards, who worked together on Rogue One. Greg was unavailable to complete the on-set production for The Creator since the dates pushed a little bit. And because we had an existing relationship, he called and wanted to see if I was interested in stepping in and assuming the co-cinematographer role. That would be this very unique collaboration because Gareth was really in the lead with a lot of the look and was going to operate the camera and wanted to shoot it in this very guerrilla filmmaking style that was very similar to his first film, Monsters, which he shot on his own. He was the cinematographer. That was shot with a very minimalistic crew of only 8 people. And it was shot on a documentary style on actually a Sony EX3 with a latest adapter. So that was Monsters. And so this, I think, was kind of the natural evolution of that filmmaking style, except the version that you would do 10 years later, since you don't need to do the EX3 with the latest adapter. There's much better technology now, but Gareth still wanted to shoot a film that was handheld, documentary, reacting to things, very spontaneous, that felt very organic. And so he wanted a very, very small, compact camera. And the FX3, after testing, that camera was already selected. By the time I came on the project, they had already done the whole process of seeing what was out there and testing and selecting that camera. And it just came down to size and weight, really, and the quality of the image, that was the camera that was the meeting point of all 3 of those requirements, and then that was it. We were off to the races. So that was really the deciding factor, and I was, by that point along for the ride, and then the rest is kind of history, and you can read plenty about the rest of the process and the lighting and the creative approach, but that's sort of the background on it, at least.
I don't want to also open the whole thing again, because as you said, there's many interviews with you and Gareth and Craig about this. But basically what interests me here in the context of where I'm going with the AI thing is basically that it seems like you have chosen this minimalistic, or your team, you all have chosen this minimalistic approach to a high budget production, which basically allowed you to shoot in actual locations and just go around the world in a smaller team than would be a usual high budget film, also because of how the technology was applied, right? And that must be something that is in high demand now in Hollywood, where budgets are probably shrinking, and I don't know, producers must be knocking down your door all the time because you have proved that it works, right?
Well, you would think so. But here's the thing. What we did was very risky. And we had the benefit of Gareth being a producer on the project. And our other producers were the producer of Monsters, so somebody who went way back with Gareth, 10 years. And then one of the producers on Rogue One, so somebody who also went back with Gareth. And then a studio that, Gareth had shopped the project around and found a studio that was willing to kind of give him full support, final cut, I don't think he had final cut, but he had a lot of creative freedom and control, not only over the creative output of the project as in the end product, but I think most importantly, the approach to the project, how he wanted to make the film. And I think that was the key, is that there was a lot of trust on the production side in Gareth, in how he wanted to make the film. And because we had the producer from Monsters, and because we had the producer from Rogue One, and he employed some of these techniques on Rogue One, even though that was a much bigger film. But even on that film, there were sequences and scenes where they did have a very minimal crew, and they did go off in the Maldives and in Iceland with very small crews and shot in a very similar style, with Gareth operating the camera, kind of very similar idea, in addition to their big soundstage work, so there were different scales on that production, but I think he improved on multiple previous occasions that this is doable. So there was a lot of trust, and even though it was a risk to do a whole film like this, he had the backing of the production and the producers to do it this way. Since the film, there have been studios and there have been other producers that have been in touch with Gareth, with our producers, and with other with our VFX side, ILM, everybody. A lot of people who were involved in the production and met with them and talked to them and asked, how did we do it? How did you accomplish this? How did you execute this on a lower budget? And just for context, we made the film for $70 million on a scale of what is normally, probably realistically, about $150 million to, $150 to $160 million realistically for a project like this. So, it's about half the price, maybe more. So other studios did have those meetings, but nobody wants to take the risk. And this is the thing. And this happens all the time, is that when the rubber hits the road, people fall back on convention, and they fall back on familiarity and comfort and what they know and the systems that they know and the methodologies that they know and the ways that they know work. Like, we've made 20 movies this way. So even though we have a proof case, we have this movie that we know work, we didn't do that movie. Somebody else made the movie. So it's still a risk for us to try and make a film in this way, because we haven't tried it like this. We know somebody else tried it and it worked, but we don't know that this works. So the minute anybody needs to take a risk, especially at a high level at a studio, and especially once you're dealing with IP, sequels, anything that has stakes, because that's the other thing. This was an original film, so there's way less stakes. There's nobody else that's worried about anything going on. And there's way less scrutiny. So, but the minute anything else like that's involved, there's way more pressure to do things the safe way. So the honest truth is that it's very, very hard to change things that are set in their ways. And even though I think there have been earnest attempts to reduce budgets, they're not, they don't go quite as far as we went, not nearly as far as we went, because it requires like a total rethink of how you approach an entire movie. And nobody wants to take that risk. It's risky because you're flipping the entire process on its head. And that's scary for people, it's scary.
Interesting. Yeah, I wonder, like the creator too should be something that's kind of, like a given.
It didn't make enough money, so I don't think that's going to happen. Also, the story, if people have seen the film, the story is very definitive and kind of ends. So there isn't really much more to tell. But
you say that now, but we've seen that before, right? Like there's always a way if there's a will.
I would make it. I would be more than happy to revisit that world, but I don't think it's in the cards, unfortunately.
But very interesting what you said about like the safe way of doing things and why those studios are scared to kind of greenlight another feature in that same vein if they're not the studio who made the other one before because they don't have experience with it and they don't want to risk it. However, I let me know if you agree, but from the outside, it feels like Hollywood and in general the creative industries, but specifically Hollywood seems to be at a very pivotal time. We have a lot of talk, of course, the impending sale of Warner Brothers to probably Netflix will probably change a lot of things. I mean, if you think about, none of us is a producer, but if you think about it, you have $150 million film that needed a theatrical window to, make some money back, both in the US and then internationally. And then you have Netflix come in and probably, want to shrink that theatrical window to a minimum just so they're eligible for the awards and then just put it on their streaming platform, which is a flat fee. They don't sell any, it's not like Apple TV in the old days where you could buy individual, which I think you still can, but buy individual films. It's all in the streaming package. They don't necessarily immediately make more money by putting a high budget film on there. So it must be in their interest to actually produce more, have a consistent output of content that is good enough. However, of course, they have a lot of very critically acclaimed series as well, but a lot of it is also good enough. And they probably don't have too much interest to produce very high budget feature films very often.
Yeah, well, on that front, A, we'll see if that merger even happens, and B, if it does, it's not going to be for another 2 years, and even then, Warner Brothers Studios has theatrical obligations through 2030. So even basically, we'll cross this bridge when we get to it. Yes, this is a worrisome thing, but it's kind of a down the road thing. So, we'll see. And also we'll see if they even change their ways. I don't know. It's speculation ultimately. So, and this will be a recurring theme in this discussion, but it's very hard to predict the future.
That's true.
So we can't know fully what Netflix's actions and motivations are in this whole thing. We can speculate, we can assume, but we don't know. And again, that's also assuming this even goes through, because there's a lot of potential antitrust and regulations that could get in the way. So anyway, but we don't have to get into that. That's a whole other topic.
That's true. But in general, of course, it's unfortunately since the pandemic, it's been a bit of a trend that, theatrical is kind of unfortunately shrinking in the sense that they're making less money than they used to because less people are going to the movies. And
yes, and you know what? Actually, I want to touch on that for a second. It's actually not true. Actually, more people are going to the movies. There's actually a study that just came out today. Movie attendance, and actually, especially among Gen Z, the younger generation, is up 8%.
Oh, that's great.
Do you know why? Yeah. Do you know why movies are making less money?
No.
Because there's fewer movies in movie theaters.
Oh.
So this is ultimately purely a numbers game. The number of theatrical releases in theaters in 2019, the year before the pandemic, was 950. And that year was an $11 billion year at the box office. This was one of the highest years. This year, we I think we'll probably hit 9 billion, which has been on the higher end of the last few years. Or sorry, it might be 8 billion. But this year, there's only been 700 films in theaters, and that's down from 950 in 2019. So there's two competing things happening here. One of which is movie-going habits have shifted since the pandemic, but not overall attendance. It's kind of a lopsided thing of what movies people go to, but not necessarily like an overall trend away from going to theaters. So that's number one. But number two is there's just less product. There's fewer movies in theaters because the film production just really hasn't recovered since the pandemic and really since the strikes. But it's really been since the pandemic. And the numbers of movies in theaters just has not gone back to pre-pandemic levels. And that's why the numbers are down, ultimately.
That's interesting and actually very encouraging, going forward. I think personally, I don't mind that there's less superhero movies because I think theoretically that would leave more room for all kinds of different stories. I think we've had a couple of years where there was like almost every film was a superhero movie, and it's kind of like,
yes.
I think it's turned off a lot of the older generation to the cinema because they felt like that's all that's there. And but hearing that trend from Gen Z, which in general seems to be more critical of a lot of overuse of social media and also just using your smartphone for everything. We see, like we had a conversation with Fujifilm before here on the podcast actually, where we talked about their trend, like about specifically the X100 and 5, how popular, how incredibly popular these cameras are. And a lot of their success really comes from simplicity and kind of the basics and really kind of trying to get that instantaneous look into like beautiful, almost film-like look into a digital camera and vintage bodies and everything that kind of makes you think about what cameras looked like 30 years ago, 40 years ago. And particularly, that's what Victor Ha from Fujifilm also said to us here. It's particularly the Gen Z crowd that is interested in that. And that actually gives me a lot of hope for the future, also for the cinema.
Yeah, me too. I think it's very easy to write off movie theaters and the theatrical experience, but statistically, it's the numbers tell a different story. But I think what it tells us is that we need to double down on theatrical and deliver even more opportunities for theatrical experiences. And I think that the encouraging signs of theatrical life this year, beyond the obvious blockbusters and the obvious big success stories, which is mostly family films, obviously, Zootopia, Minecraft, that kind of thing, which is always going to do well. And I'm glad that those films do well. And I'm also glad that superhero films as a genre are kind of waning in ubiquity, even though I think we still need some of them because you just need variety ultimately, But I think obviously the fact that Sinners, Weapons, One Battle After Another, that these films were successful. And I think that what's common with all of them is that they delivered a unique cinematic experience, something that you could only experience in a theater with other people. That's what made them special. And in the case of Sinners and One Battle After Another, it was the format. It was something you could only experience in the cinema, the large format. There was something premium, there was something unique and special about it, right? So that's the lesson. That's the takeaway. And I think, unfortunately, this fall, there were also many films. I think that the New York Times had an article about it. I think it was like 30 films that were the what's typically referred to as the adult drama, the adult mid-budget drama, which is the type of film that all of us want to come back because it's the kind that we all love. But all of those films flopped. And it's all films with movie stars, A-list actors, not IP, not sequels, not superhero movies, not anything blockbuster. It's all mid-budget dramas with famous actors that all failed at the box office. But I think that the common thread with all of those films is that none of them really got great reviews, and none of them were really something special, like something that demanded that people come see it in the theater, unlike Sinners, Weapons, One Battle After Another, these other experiences, right? Like those are sort of the exceptions that prove the rule, that in order to bring people back to theaters, you need to make more special theatrical experiences that give people a reason to come and see something special. So anyway, I do feel optimistic about it, but it requires even more investment in those kinds of films, those kinds of storytellers, and that kind of thing. So anyway,
no, absolutely.
Long story short.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think part of the thing is also that, you see a lot of high profile filmmakers and actors now in streaming productions. And it's not that all of what shows up on the streaming is bad, not at all. But I think a lot of those films would actually deserve a longer theater window. And it's just a bit of a marketing thing, because if you see a Netflix film in the theater, you're probably like, well, why should I go if I can watch it kind of for free as part of my plan? Like in 2 weeks. If that window was 3 months, for example, I just watched the new Rian Johnson murder mystery the other night, which is very entertaining and very well made film. Great acting, amazing cast. And then you're like, if I know that this is in the theater for 2 weeks, I'm probably not going to go. If I know it's there for 3 months and only then I can watch it in the streaming platform, I might go because I want to see it now, because I see all the reviews. So it's a bit of a, like you can make the world as you want it to be in a sense of Netflix, right? You want people to just spend their time streaming stuff, but I think they would have the choice to do it differently. But yeah, I hope that those numbers would actually give them an incentive to try that.
I mean, I agree. The Netflix thing is a unsolvable conundrum at the moment. And I mean, the first Knives Out was a huge blockbuster, made $350 million worldwide, I think. So, which is why Netflix paid a bunch of money to get the exclusive rights to the sequels. The second one got a fairly serious theatrical exclusive window to appease Rian Johnson, and it did really well. And then this third one, they didn't get the same treatment, and it was just dumped in a handful of theaters for with no marketing before appearing on Netflix, where it's been doing really well, of course. Frankenstein, similarly, I think was doing really well in the limited theatrical release. If that got a full theatrical release, I think it probably would have made quite a bit of money. So yeah, I mean that's an ongoing frustration. Everybody in Hollywood is I think becoming extremely frustrated with the stubbornness of the streaming only model when it comes to those kinds of films. And so I don't know what happens with that, but it's a problem, and it's undeniable that I think the point of this tangent is that there have been challenges and changes in the industry, and it's going through a shift, certainly since COVID. There was definitely a trajectory up until 2019 that got significantly disrupted. And I think it was already starting to be disrupted. I mean, streaming really was a major disruptor. But up until COVID, it was kind of on the periphery. And then COVID just supercharged it, because there were 9 months where theaters were closed. Nobody was going to theaters. And every other studio doubled down on streaming and started their own streaming platforms to compete with Netflix. And then we entered a full streaming era, and everything changed. And then once we started coming out of COVID, the whole everything was just different, and we just really haven't recovered from it. So yes, and we're still going through those changes. So that's undeniable.
So it's the changes that come from still the COVID area, which supercharged streaming, like you said, but there were also the strikes that heavily impacted Hollywood production for a
Yes,
long time and do so to this day.
to
And
this day.
and last but not least, let's move on to generative video AI, which is, I
Yeah.
think, it's still an impending doom kind of slash opportunity. We don't know. But where is your personal stance on where things stands now and where they headed? And then, as a follow-up question, where is the conversation in the wider Hollywood community on this?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question, and it's a little broad, so I'm not really sure where to begin.
We
But
can narrow it down.
yeah, I guess I can start with the overall reaction. I think in the Hollywood community, I think I could, you could probably divide it into there's two. I guess there's three main camps of people, and I guess maybe before that there's can sort of give an overview, which is what seems to be happening is that first of all, I mean, I think the main context behind this is that this generative AI, and I'll specifically focus on generative video and imagery. We're not going to be talking about language models. So that's a whole other can of worms that's disrupting many other industries. But we'll just focus on image-based models here. But I mean, even within the film industry, language models are also disruptive. Screenwriting and things like that. But somehow less so. I think really the main focus right now is video, generative video models and image models. These models like kind of came out of nowhere, and over the last few years, and completely from outside of the industry, which I think is the key component here, is that all of this technology is not coming from the film industry. It's coming from tech companies, from Silicon Valley. This technology is being developed by Google, by OpenAI, by Runway, by all of these other startups and companies that are researching AI and researching diffusion models, image generators, language models, and all of these things, in which generative AI is almost a byproduct. Like, that's not the main product of any of these companies. All of these things, Sora, Veo, like all of these video generators and image generators and all this, they're kind of the side product of the main product, which is the main product is the model. It's the model that you're training to get better and learn and understand reasoning and language and to better iterate and understand patterns and all that. The images and videos and stuff that it generates is the side effect, but the main purpose of it is to feed itself more data to be better at pattern recognition and training and knowledge and understanding of all these things, so that it can be applied to other fields that can actually make money. So I think that understanding that, I think, is number one, kind of the most important thing, is that this is outside technology. Within the industry, reacting to this, now there's three camps. One is complete skepticism, like reject this. This is an affront to anything holy, and we need to just reject and stop and avoid this at all costs. The other camp is people who have just fully embraced it. This is the future. Well, I think there's kind of two sub camps. There's one camp that says this is inevitable, so we should embrace it because we don't want to resist new technology. And then there's another camp that is more enthusiastically embracing it as some sort of like, this is the democratization of creativity, and this is now opening new opportunities for people to be able to tell stories in ways they've never been able to tell before, and blah, blah, blah. So those are kind of two camps in the pro side. And then there's kind of a middle, which is people who are saying this is a pragmatic approach. And I think I kind of fall here. There's obviously useful stuff that comes from this technology. And we know that there's useful stuff because machine learning, before it was rebranded as AI, has already been integrated into many technological workflows within the film industry for years, especially in visual effects, but also in audio engineering and other kind of peripheral fields, mostly in post-production. And so, to reject it wholeheartedly, I think is technologically illiterate and, kind of a Luddite thing to do. And I think personally that there's some obvious benefits to any kind of technology that can make the more laborious parts of certain workflows more efficient, to then free up more opportunities for creativity, especially in visual effects and especially in post-production things, and give you opportunities to make things more streamlined and a little bit better and quicker and more efficient. And I really like what James Cameron says about this. When people have asked him what his views on AI are in terms of saving money with regards to visual effects, he says, he has a very simple explanation, which is great, which is, he says, it shouldn't cost anyone their job, because it can't and shouldn't replace any artist who's working on a film. But what it can and should do is allow each and every one of those artists to do their job twice as fast, so that you can take the post-production timeline on a film and shrink it in half. And that alone will start saving productions a ton of money. But again, this now goes back to the creator conversation from before, which is you need to start rethinking the approach to how you budget and schedule a project, and how you're integrating technology. So anyway, that's kind of where we're at now, I guess, in terms of the three categories of how people are sort of reacting to this technology and where it sits right now. But we can get into more detail, kind of depending on which where you want to go from here.
Yeah,
because there's definitely a lot of different things to talk about and explore from here.
No, thank you for that overview, and I agree. That's the same way we perceive it. Unfortunately, I feel like the black and white kind of approach, the total rejection and the total embracement of it, seems to be way too powerful, because none of these, as always in life, there is it's not a yes or no question. It's the middle ground where the truth lies. And that's also the approach that we've tried to take as a website and in treating the subject. Like, we know that a lot of, we're an industry website reporting about technology specifically that helps filmmakers in general. And that for us includes also those models. We just need to inform the people that they are there. But there's an insane amount of pushback from, of course, I don't think they are the majority, but there's a very vocal part of the audience that is like, why do you even report about this stuff? It's destroying our jobs.
Sure.
It's costing our jobs.
Yeah,
but it's a logical, fear-based reaction. But I don't think that, like playing ostrich and putting your head in the sand will actually, make it go away. It won't go away. And I think that cinematographers also, as well as everybody else in the filmmaking community, but we are mostly catering to cinematographers and camera assistants, basically, they need to be informed about this stuff, just to be aware of it, even if they don't want to use it themselves. And I think there is an ethical way of using it, but I think we see a lot of the unethical usages of it on display every day when we scroll social media and all the other things, right? Because people basically generating images on text prompts, imitating the actual art that somebody else made before them is troubling, because they're literally creating something out of nothing, and it looks better and better every day. And that, I think, is what scares a lot of people in the visual industries, which I agree, and I'm I'm also sometimes I'm like, I don't know where things are headed from here. But I think there is an ethical way of doing that. If you are a creative person and you are an image maker, whether it's a photographer, DP, or director, or even editor or visual effects person, and you base this on your creations, like you feed the machine your actual creation and then work off of that, that can be an ethical way of using it. Yes, those models are still trained on a lot of stuff that those companies probably never got legal access to. I mean, that's the troubling part of that. And I don't know if there's any way to avoid that. But I think there is a way to ethically use it, like you said, and also use it for efficiency gains in filmmaking on jobs that probably, yes, what James Cameron says, I agree with, but I think it's very difficult to be honest about this, because there will be jobs as they currently are will go away. But I think other jobs will come up, because what will happen is that the whole iteration process that is so painful in filmmaking, because it takes such a long time, will become faster and will allow you to have more versions of a storyboard, of a mood board, of something. So ideally, the people who have been working on this can just apply what they've always known, use the technology to their advantage based on their own creations, and enhance what they've been doing to be more efficient and actually be more prolific with what they do, and not just be out of a job. But I think it's a bit naive to think that there won't be some jobs lost, but hopefully new ones will come up.
Well, I mean, look, two things. I guess I'll address the job loss and the fear around that at the end of this thought. But the knee-jerk reaction against it, I think, is completely understandable, and I think it comes from this. And I agree with this. There currently exist and people use bespoke closed-loop image generating models that you train entirely on your own data that you feed into it, that it can then compile and then generate video or images based on what you fed it. And it is not trained on any outside information or data at all. And these are custom models that exist that you can access, download, disseminate. They're open source. You can get these right now. These are things that actually exist. These are also things that are already built into your existing visual effects workflows. These are things that have already been used for years. Again, a few years ago, we called it deepfake. Now it's called something else. Like, these things keep getting rebranded. But again, this technology was already being used in visual effects for many years. And you would just feed it a lot of training data, and then it would take time to compile, and then you can generate different things. And like I said before, as a filmmaker, as a cinematographer, I can think of 100 use cases for something like that would make current processes within the filmmaking engine more efficient, that I think right now are very inefficient. Getting B-roll, getting inserts, getting like, this is just in terms of narrative filmmaking, where a lot of resources are going into very little net result that goes on the screen, like something that's on screen for a fraction of a second that you're spending a ton of resources to film this tiny little thing. Like, there's way more efficient ways to do that, and some of this technology can be leveraged. Here's where people get tripped up, and I understand why people have a knee-jerk reaction to say, we just want to reject this outright. The video generating models, the full-on Gen AI models that are mostly in use right now, VO and Sora and all of these, I do believe, and this is my personal view on this, and people can disagree, but I understand where people are coming from. I do believe that these models are kind of ontologically evil. Like they're purely malignant forces. And I understand why people have this reaction to them, because they serve no positive purpose to society whatsoever. In fact, the exact opposite. These video generating models have done nothing but create chaos and flood the internet with utter garbage, or as people call it, slop, that has completely overtaken every social media feed, has begun to trick not only our entire parents' generation, they're already gone, but now starting to fool our generation. My friend group that, up until a year ago were perfectly rational people. I'm not on Facebook anymore, thank God, for years, but they're all still on Facebook, and Facebook is nothing but Gen AI slop videos nowadays. It's nothing but that. And so they send stuff in the group all the time. They're like, look at this video. Oh my God. And it's obviously AI, like, to me, because I can see this stuff very easily, and I'm not special. Like, it's very easy to spot this stuff if you know what to look for. And it's sad to me. Like, it's so sad, because we used to share fun videos with each other and all that, and now it's not fun because it's all AI. And then I have to be the one who points out to them, this is AI. And it's not just me. There's a couple others in the group that are the party poopers that have to point out, sorry, I know this is a fun, cute video of the animals, but it's fake. It's AI. And everything, half the stuff you see on Instagram, it's fake AI, and TikTok, it's fake AI. So, like, what actual good do these things provide? Like, does being able to generate these videos, what does it do? What does it do? Like, I've yet to find a good answer to that question, because it seems to only do bad things. And this is just the innocent stuff. Like, this is just silly videos. The damaging stuff is disinformation, political things, manipulating things. And like you said, when this stuff gets better, as the video models get better and better, the ability to fool people is just going to get worse and worse. And with no guardrails, and these models just being out there with nothing stopping people from just generating whatever they want, just putting it on the internet, it's only going to get worse. So, I understand why people have this reaction, the knee-jerk reaction, because these models, the ones from the tech companies, not the bespoke models that are used for very specific use cases within a niche industry, but the models put out by OpenAI and by Google and all this, are destroying the fabric of society. So I understand why people have that reaction, because I have that reaction. And so when people use those models to generate a McDonald's commercial, of course people are going to have a negative reaction to that, because it's essentially the same thing. It's still contributing to the destruction of the fabric of society. It's just in a niche industry, but it's kind of still part of the same slop. It's all the same. So I get it. I understand why people have that reaction. We'll come back to that, but in terms of the jobs thing, ultimately, yes, jobs will be disrupted, but like you said, mostly I think they will change. So, the ideal scenario where we're kind of setting aside these terrible Gen AI models and only focusing on the useful stuff that would actually be helpful to integrate into the film industry, the areas that will mostly be impacted are post. Visual effects, post audio, that kind of stuff, or maybe previs and storyboarding, some stuff in pre-production, like that kind of thing. So those are already fields that were heavily impacted when CG came along, right? A lot of artisans and craftspeople that were very skilled at model making, matte painting, creature design, stop motion, a lot of specialty crafts had to kind of go away when CG came around as a technology and emerged in the 80s and 90s. But those artisans, a lot of them pivoted. And with the advent of CG, so many new jobs emerged and new positions and new roles and new things for people to learn and embrace. And in cinematography, on the camera side, the same thing happened when digital came around. Like, yes, there was sort of a loss of lab technicians, chemists, film loaders, that kind of thing. But with digital cameras, we suddenly needed DITs, image technicians, VTR, colorists, color scientists, like all of these other roles. And if anything, once again, much like in post on the camera side, like the department grew. If anything, like there's now more roles, both in post and in on the production side, just in the camera department. So I think with visual effects, as this technology gets integrated, it's going to kind of be the same thing. Like it's going to be disrupted, but it's not necessarily a net loss of jobs. It's more just some positions will have to pivot what they're doing, but the ideal version of it is not a job killer. But here's the thing, and the thing that people are knee-jerk reacting to is stuff like that McDonald's commercial, which if people aren't aware of what we're talking about, this kind of went a little viral last week or 2 weeks ago, and it was McDonald's Europe. It was a country in Europe, I think, commissioned a fully AI generated ad that was immediately just demolished online, or like just destroyed in the comments because it looked pretty bad. And then they at first closed the comments, and then they took it off of Instagram, and then eventually took it off of YouTube entirely, and kind of put out a statement saying, well, this was McDonald's, put out a statement saying, well, it was an experiment. We wanted to try it, see what the new technology was. We'll do better next time, kind of. Because it had such a negative reaction. But I think stuff like that has such a negative reaction because that kind of use of Gen AI, and this is the thing that people are reacting to, really is replacing the entire production pipeline. It's replacing everybody on set, actors, DPs, production designers, sound mixers, every single person who works on set. But it's also replacing them with something objectively shittier, like just objectively worse, and something that requires, ironically, more time, more resources, more all of this stuff, because the people, the company that generated this went out and tried to defend it and said, this took us 7 weeks.
And 70,000 prompts, I think, if I recall correctly.
Yes,
that's crazy.
Exactly. 7 weeks of sleepless nights prompting over and over again. And it's like, that sounds way less efficient than just hiring a crew and going out and filming it. Yeah. So like, what did we gain from all this? Anyway, so that's what I think people are reacting to, and I think rightfully so.
I think there's a lot of things you touched on that I just want to grab here, because one that, like you said, the inherently evil nature of VO3 and Sora 2 or whatever these models are called, and I agree. They really haven't done anything positive, especially on social media and the wider general public. As you said, our parents' generation is completely already believing in this stuff, which is horrible. But I think what pisses off the majority of people is when they get fooled into seeing something that looks like an actual person on screen, and then they learn that they're not actually watching a real person that was filmed with a camera, whether it's an actor or not, right? And that is, I think, that explains the backlash to that McDonald's commercial, because I don't think it's only the creative community that kind of reacted that way to that commercial. It was really the wider public. And
That's right.
if that tells you or tells us a story about how these things are perceived, is that people are not willing to accept to be fooled, and particularly fooled in a way that they simply seem to think that they're watching actual people on screen and then learn that they're not, even if it says in the lower right corner that it's AI generated, like in that case, because we've just played it back as you were talking in the background, that commercial. But it's that gives me hope. It gives me hope that at least I think humans always want to see humans, right? No matter what genre you're working in as a filmmaker, the audience wants to see actual people on screen, unless you're working on animation. But even then, you want the human touch, you want actual voices.
You do.
And you don't want AI generated voices and that. And that's why you have those high profile actors attached to animation films kind of voicing characters, because that's still a pull for people. Because if they hear that Morgan Freeman is the voice of an animated character, they're more likely to actually watch it, because they have an expectation of what a Morgan Freeman character would be like, even if it's animation. And I think that gives me a little bit of hope that it's really there's going to be a shift in the audience. I think if you think back when those models first came up, particularly the video models 2 years ago, when the quality was really much, much worse than it is now, I think nobody expected these to become better this quickly, that much better this quickly. However, I think we've also, and I don't know if it's just us, the creative people, of course, we're more kind of accustomed to seeing or recognizing when something's AI, but I feel like the general public, and especially the younger generation, that's of course the future of any media consumption, becoming more aware of when something is fake. Like there's almost like, to a degree, where you watch actual photos sometimes that are over-edited, especially over-edited photos, and you're like seeing yourself taking a step back. It's like, is that real? Mm-hmm. Is that an actual thing? But it's good in a way that people are questioning things, and that I think they're becoming more aware of the fakery. And I don't think, I think I feel this general shift in the public where they're simply not accepting fake people on screen anymore. That's probably not true for a lot of other things that go into making a film, which is, not the actual acting. So that's why I think the disruption in visual effects is an ongoing thing. Like you said, I mean, it's already happened. It's just a continuation of that. And I think those text-based prompts that now basically everybody can make images and videos based on some text are still, that's new for the general public. But I think machine learning is not new per se. What's troubling still, I mean, is that the randomness of it, right? Just, I mean, you're writing a prompt and it's spitting out pretty random stuff. I mean, you can be as detailed as possible, and it's still going to be not exactly what you want, because essentially you cannot describe an image 100% by text. It's simply not possible. And that's why it's also not, it cannot be created 100% by that. I think where things are starting to shift is, and that's also when it becomes more useful in visual effects, is when you're able to actually, paint on the actual image and just say, well, actually, swap that background. Just, I don't want the sky like that. I want a few more clouds there, and then it generates you something which is closer to that. But then arguably we're getting closer to traditional VFX workflows anyway, right? So
exactly.
And then it's, I think it's fine, But just in general, I think the acceptance of fake people on screen is not there by the wider public, and that gives me a little bit of hope that this is not something that's gonna age well.
Yes, I completely agree. And I think that's actually a key point we didn't really touch on, is that the way the technology works is essentially it's a slot machine. You know, like, in fact, the more specific you are, the less reliable it is. Like, it's better at generating something generic than it is at generating something specific. If you ever try to use the model, if you try to describe something really specific, it tends to not give you what you're looking for. Whereas if you just give it a pretty broad description, like Pat riding a surfboard, it's very good at that, because the more general and the more kind of basic a thing you're asking for, that's kind of the stuff that it's good at, because it's based on an aggregate, average of every image in existence, essentially. So, and it's very bad at making adjustments. So if you describe something and then ask it to change an element in something that it's already created, it will then start to randomly change other things in the image that you didn't ask for, because it's not aware of the overall image. You're just regenerating things over and over again. So this is why I think, like you were saying, I mean, the key to it is, and this is what, this is something that just launched, the Creators Coalition on AI. This is led by Daniel Kwan of the Daniels, and Joseph Gordon-Levitt, and a bunch of other filmmakers. The purpose of that initiative, and any initiative, I think that's the key here, is that creatives are making the decision of what we need from the technology and what we don't need. Same with visual effects artists. A visual effects workflow supervisor, artist, whatever, is going to decide what of the technology is useful to integrate into a workflow and what isn't. And that's the key. And this has been the ongoing issue with all of this, is that OpenAI and Google and other companies, Runway, etc., are coming into the film industry from outside and forcing their technology on us and saying, this is your future. So and it's already happening. So get on board. But we didn't ask for that. We didn't design this technology. No creative person asked for it, and we're not in control of it. This is the problem. Like that's the pinch point. And so as long as creatives, artists, and so forth are the ones deciding what to integrate and what's actually useful, then it's fine. But that's been the ongoing issue, is that we're not in the driver's seat. The other issue, and what does give me hope, two things give me hope. One is everything you just described. I think there is a noticeable and I think increasing backlash, especially compared to where we were 2 years ago, where there may have been maybe more of a curiosity to this technology, whereas now I think there's more of an open hostility to it among the and increasingly the broader public and mostly younger generations. And I think that hostility comes from this kind of, it's a combination of fear and like you said, it's kind of anger at being fooled, at being, it's insulting, to be fooled like that, to be treated like it's insulting to your time and your intelligence and everything, to think like I'm not even worth, being spoken to by a human. You're just generating a video with some other person. You think that I'm too dumb to notice or care. Like, so I understand. I think it's very good that people, especially younger people, are having that kind of backlash. But I think the other encouraging thing here, and again, we're not in the prediction business, but there's certainly very strong signs that all of this is a very big bubble financially, and that a lot of these companies, especially the smaller ones, and I include OpenAI and some of these other companies in the smaller category, are not going to survive the bubble bursting. because none of them are making any money off of any of this stuff. In fact, they're all losing billions and billions, hundreds of billions of dollars every year, with no path to profitability. OpenAI loses hundreds of billions of dollars a year. Sora loses them billions and billions of dollars. Even though they charge a subscription, they do not make enough money on the subscription. In fact, it costs them more money on the data processing to generate videos than they make on the subscription fee. So ironically, they actually lose more money on their subscribers than
So we
they
should
do.
use it more, actually.
Yeah, their free account, because the free accounts don't use it as much. And other encouraging signs are when Sora 2 came out earlier this summer, there, and was released as an app that was kind of like a social media feed. There was an initial, pretty big surge in downloads because it was new, and also the video model was very enticing because it allowed you to generate all these videos that kind of looked like cell phone videos or Ring cameras or stuff like that, like things that were a little bit more handmade and very realistic looking. But downloads and usage of that app have cratered since, which is usually a sign of an app not lasting very long. Like for an app to really last, you need the downloads to increase over time, not like surge at the beginning and then decrease. That is the telltale sign of an app that is not going to last, because it just means people downloaded it once initially out of curiosity and novelty, and the novelty just wears off. And that's been the trend every time one of these things comes out. Every time there's a new AI model, both on the image and the video side, there's like a surge of novelty and interest for a week, a few weeks, maybe a couple of days, and then it just kind of quietly fizzles out as people lose interest because there's no substance to it whatsoever. And once the novelty wears off, once the shiny new thing wears off, and people remember or realize or run out of fun things to do with it, to play with it, they just throw it in the bin because there's nothing else to do with it, because they can't do anything useful. And I think that is also encouraging, and it's frustrating, because I think you and I and other creatives are sitting here kind of banging our heads against the wall, being like, we've been trying to say this for years, like, this is useless. This is not a replacement for real art made by artists who are, expressing ourselves and putting in work and thought and effort. And yet we keep going through this cycle of new things coming up, and people losing interest. It's like the same thing over and over again. And it's like, when will people realize that this is pointless? But I do think it's encouraging that this cycle does not seem to be breaking. In fact, it just seems to be, with each new one, people get more and more frustrated, and the backlash gets more and more intense. So I do think that is a promising sign. And that, combined with the fact that all these companies are losing money on all this stuff, I think is encouraging, though frustrating in the short term. We'll see if we're right. I mean,
Yeah.
Check in 5 years, but I don't know.
I think it won't need 5 years, in my opinion, but I agree with you. It's, I have to take off my filmmaker hat for a second and put my publisher hat on. As a very big website, like, we also suffer from what Google is doing in other areas of AI. Still, you might remember the slogan they used to have, "Don't be evil." I think we've come a very long way from that. Because now ironic. They arguably they have honestly been a pivotal role. They've played a pivotal role for the internet as a whole over the last, 25, almost 27, 8 years in growing the internet, because the bargain was always the same. You create, especially text content, but later also with YouTube video content, which also is owned by Google. And then, like, we earn money through advertisers from our industry, which we, have the direct relationships with. We don't actually use Google as an intermediary. We sell ads from camera manufacturers and accessory manufacturers directly and display them on our website. That's how we keep the lights on here. That's how we are able to do all this and the reporting. Now, with their AI overviews that they've introduced earlier this year or last year, I don't know, they literally are taking away traffic from every website on the internet by simply stealing. They have a crawler, like their search crawler. You can't even block it out because otherwise you would also disappear from Google search, which you don't want. But they have now combined that crawler with their AI crawler. So you cannot really opt out of the AI results. And then, like you show up in the AI results, somebody asks, for example, we have this huge database of lab tests that we do, scientific tests of dynamic range and latitude. We're the only ones that do it that methodologically. Well, bad word. We're the only ones who have a scientific method of actually doing those tests and putting all those results into a database. And now this is free to access. You just need an account on our website and you can just, compare cameras and just go through all the results that have been, arduous work for many, many years. And now you just put in a Google prompt that's like, what is the best, what's the latitude of this and that camera? And 9 out of 10 times it will give you a result from CineD in the AI overview, and people don't even have to go to the website. And, of course, that creates a whole bunch of problems for all publishers on the internet, because essentially that bargain is now changing because, well, we're very lucky that we have a very loyal audience and like a huge amount of traffic still. We do see a drop in the direct traffic that comes from Google. It's significant, and it's I think the industry or the average on the internet is like almost 60-70% drop for most websites, like publishers like us that put out a lot of content. And it's significant. And essentially it kind of puts that whole, like this agreement between Google and the creative and publishing industry of the world on its head, because Google profited of our content for a long time, and we profited of Google sending us traffic, but now they are sending less traffic. So the incentive to actually create more content is diminishing for many websites. And we already see a consolidation there as well. In especially, I think the ones that are hit hardest are the websites that are, like very broad in terms of like news and world news and that kind of stuff, because that content essentially becomes exchangeable very quickly. So that is one of the things. And the other thing is, of course, everything you mentioned with their image generating and video generating models, which is being trained of the whole library of YouTube, which they own, which, maybe it was like a small line in some of the user agreements that nobody reads, that everybody has to accept, otherwise you're not on the platform anymore. But nobody's going to take off, a decade worth of work on YouTube just because they change their terms and conditions. So they kind of trap you in that. And I think that it all comes down to, right now, Google is the evil one in the room here. And I agree with you. I think OpenAI, like we have this Sam Altman, the soft-spoken guy who really manages to make you feel good about the worst things. Because I agree, every product that they've put out seems to be actually detrimental to what's happening in general. I mean, the whole Sora 2 discussion, I completely agree with you. It's like, what's the point of that app? And shouldn't you work on that AGI or whatever you're working on? Like you want that ultimate intelligence that can actually help humanity to solve scientific questions by itself and so on, that you originally wanted. But they seem to be hard pressed in this competition with Google and some others to just output new stuff that people don't forget about them, because arguably whatever OpenAI has right now is worse than what Google has put out. And the Gemini models are so much better in discussing things, even like even getting advice in different fields, whether it's feedback on even legal questions, it's much more nuanced than any of the OpenAI models are. And the image models have also become a lot better.
Yes.
But it's, yeah, I agree. We are now in a state where I think all of this will become a commodity. I think it will not matter anymore. And that's where the bubble lies for me. It's like every 2 weeks, one of those companies releases a new model and it's better than what the competition has done. And that it kind of shows to me that you throw more compute at those things and more data at these things and they become better. And it's going to be a commodity, it's going to be like, it doesn't matter which gas station I go to get my gas. Essentially, it's all the same. And I think very soon that will be the case, but that will diminish the value for each individual company because it's just going to be there and you're not going to be, and you see people are just switching their plans, nobody has, if you pay for a plan, you just switch the next month to the other one because they have a better model. So they have like no moat in order for their technology. It's not, you're not invested in it. It's not, you don't need to do a long-term subscription. You don't want to because next week the other one is going to have a better one. So that's for me where the bubble lies, is that basically, in 1 or 2 or 3 years from now, we will probably, it's going to be omnipresent, but it's also going to be just second nature. Nobody's going to call it AI anymore. It's just going to be, you ask it a question, it gives you an answer, and hopefully it will be verified. And with just going back to the video models, I think, at some point, and that's also true for text models, I think they are actually going to get worse. They're not going to get worse in terms of image generation, but they're going to get worse for both text and images because they're going to start feeding on themselves. Because they're gonna, we have so much AI on the internet now that it's AI regurgitating itself, and it's gonna be, it's gonna have a very much detrimental effect on the output because the mistakes that are inherent in those models will be amplified through more data that's gonna be pushed through those models, and that can't be a good thing. And, no idea where this is going to head, but I feel like with the current pushback on many of those things from the wider public, I hope there will be a shift in a massive shift in acceptance for many of those things, simply because we're also going to see worse results over time.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I subscribe to that theory too, that the models will get worse, because I think it was recently that the overall content on the internet, text-based content, crossed over 50% as AI generated, I think, across all websites, in terms of written articles. So now that's what the AI models are going to be trained on, and it's going to start deteriorating, which is a good thing. But yes, the elephant in the room of all of this is Google, because unlike all these other companies like OpenAI that are hemorrhaging money, Google is not hemorrhaging money. Google is a massively profitable company because they have an incredibly diversified portfolio of business models, from search and from ads, and the AI component is ultimately a small part of their business that they're just going to integrate into their existing businesses, unlike these other companies that are just throwing stuff at the wall and seeing what sticks. But with Google, because they're so massive already, Alphabet, that's why they're just going to be the last one standing. That's what, when the bubble pops, it's not that AI goes away. It's just that Google is the only one left. That's what ends up happening. And that's scary because their model is the best one already, like you said. And so without any guardrails, which are desperately needed, like their image model right now, Nano Banana, is terrifying. Like the image generating model is already too good now. and can generate images that are indiscernible from real images. So, like, there's no more of this with still images. Being able to look in the corner, you have to really look close to find little inconsistencies and stuff that doesn't make sense. It's getting down to like really, really fine details now. And soon those will be gone. And you will not be able to tell the difference between an AI generated image and a real image anymore. Like sometime in the next, I don't know, year or two. And once we cross that threshold, like it's over. Objective truth doesn't exist unless there is a enforced regulation that forces a unremovable watermark or an unremovable metadata or something that makes sure that any AI generated image is designated and known to be an AI generated image, because otherwise there's no way to know. And not only that, but an ability to maybe filter out AI generated images based on the metadata so that anybody can opt out, like across the internet, like anywhere. And these images, the Google models do have this metadata embedded. So anything generated from their models does have the AI generated metadata embedded, and you can then run it through the Google model, and you can ask it if this was generated with the model, and it will tell you yes or no based on the metadata. But that's not sustainable because most people are not doing that. Most people are not going to go and run every single image they bump into for the rest of their lives through this and check if it's AI or not. We can't live like that. So at some point, like, we're going to need to decide what as a world, as a global society, we're going to do with this. Because if you are going to be able to generate indistinguishable images in AI that look identical to reality, and there's no way to tell.
Maybe that's a product idea for Apple, actually, who seem to be more ambivalent on the whole subject. And, just to integrate that on an OS level, both on phones and computers, to just right click, is that AI, and just tell you if they know, right? If they can find out.
Yeah, maybe, except they just made a deal to start using Google's model in their devices. So I don't know if they would. That would be very mutually beneficial, but I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. That side of this is outside of the film industry at this point, and it's definitely worrisome to me. Yeah. Like, just as a, how do we approach this as a society, right? But I think that we'll have to find a way. I do ultimately, is something you said before that I completely agree with. At the end of the day, I think was something that has been true for all of time. Humans, at the end of the day, seek connection with other humans, and this has always been true. And even now, even in the digital age, with TikTok, social media, video games, screens, smartphones, all of these distractions, more than we've ever had before. In addition to all of that, attendance to concerts, music concerts, is all-time high. Attendance at national parks is all-time high. Travel is at an all-time high. Like, people, even with all of these distractions, still seek out human connection and real experiences. Maybe even more so to counter all of these distractions in life. So, and I think that that's telling, and I think hopefully those trends will only continue as we are even more inundated with this stuff, and maybe as people start to kind of wake up and realize how much smartphones and social media and all of this stuff has like kind of consumed our life for the last 10 years. I've certainly kind of had that awakening myself, in the last few years, and stepped back quite a bit from social media. Obviously still use Instagram mostly because for work purposes, it's still very useful and also just nice to stay connected to the community and all that. But I don't use any other social media, and I think a lot of people hopefully are kind of going through a similar realization, and maybe all of this AI stuff will only kind of accelerate that, because as all of these websites, as these social media sites just become more and more just unusable, maybe that'll just drive more people away, and not just unusable, but untrustworthy. And the Google thing is interesting because at some point that'll also have to be addressed, the Google search issue, because what they're doing right now with the AI search is very short-sighted, because at the end of the day, if you want new content and new information to appear in the AI search summaries, you will need to restore some sort of incentive for people to create new content. Because what they're doing right now is like you said, it's completely disincentivizing anybody to create any text-based website content at all, because it's completely cratering ad revenue. So they're going to have to reassess that, because I think at some point, Google are reckless right now and completely behaving in a way that's completely amoral, but they're not stupid. Like, there's still smart people there. And so I think somewhere through all of this recklessness, I have to hope that some voice of reason will emerge that will say, hey, this is going to hurt us, our bottom line, long term. And so we're going to need to change the course, or else, what's our future here exactly? Because otherwise, if the whole internet collapses, that can't be good for Google. So
yeah, I agree.
Somebody's gonna have to do something, right?
And they also have an incentive to still send people to websites beyond just new content generation, because they have their own ad network, right? You have display ads running through Google's AdSense, which are on a lot of websites all over the internet. So it's not that,
as far as I know, that's still their biggest revenue stream anyway. So I think that
I don't know how it divides between text ads on the search versus that, but it is definitely a major one.
Yeah, I guess ads in general is that's still their main, their bread and butter. So they kind of need to keep that going.
I agree with you. I hope they're just trying to put the fire out that is OpenAI, where you have. I'm also teaching on a film school, and you talk to the young generation, and they actually, a lot of them also use ChatGPT to just instead of Google, and I think that's what worries them. So that's why they're trying to get into that game as well, which is understandable. But as you said, I don't think OpenAI has a long-term mission that can actually succeed right now. So let's see where they are in a year or two from now, when the bubble either bursts or deflates slowly. And
the irony of that is that ChatGPT is a terrible alternative to Google, because it often hallucinates answers, and it ChatGPT way more than Google search or any other search AIs. ChatGPT is like designed to not give you search results, but really just tell you what you want to hear. So it often just tells you wrong stuff, because it's just kind of tells you what you want. And so it can often be a really terrible search engine unless you're fact checking it. So I know a lot of people use it like that, but it's ironic, because it's actually way worse for that purpose. But anyway, that's just a tangent.
Very true. But let's get back to the, like away from the doom and gloom of AI to the more productive uses, and also back to filmmaking. If you were to think back about your career, even your student times and, the short films you created or later on feature films, but if you look back and put yourself in the shoes of a young filmmaker right now who's starting out, who's maybe, still in film school or just after that, and you have access to all those tools, where do you think would be a productive way of using them inside of your workflow as a cinematographer, and just to help you with actually telling a story and preparing for it?
I mean, me personally, I don't see a use for it in my workflow. But maybe that's just because I'm old fashioned and I am set in my ways, and I like my workflow the way it is. And I don't believe in outsourcing any part of my workflow to an algorithm. Like I don't need it. I don't need an algorithm to contribute to any part of my workflow creatively. I don't need it. I don't need to jog ideas with it. I don't need to jog concept art or reference images or anything like that. I find my current workflow for that, which is I have a reference image library that I've collected over the years on my computer and on my Instagram, and I have Shot Deck and other websites to reference existing images from commercials, music videos, and films. And that workflow works for me to gather references, and then also just from my own experience and memories of films, and also, of course, from art, existing art and photographs. And I have photo books and, my memory of places I've visited and museums. And I have a folder on my phone with art that I've seen. I take pictures of paintings in museums. So that's my well of references. And then other than that, I just use my imagination and pull from the well of creativity. And that's how I like to work. So I do not have a place in this for a generative AI component to contribute to this workflow. That's not to say that somebody else wouldn't kind of replace any one of those things with using a generative AI model to kind of generate ideas or concept art or reference images or something like that. I don't see anything inherently wrong with that, because you're basically just doing what I do with existing images, but you're just using something else to kind of replace that part of the process. So I could see that as a use case, but I wouldn't do that, me personally. Where I see a use for it is actually in production, but only in very, very specific circumstances. And it's circumstances that I think do require like a full VFX workflow, like a traditional VFX workflow. It's actually not something that I think a film student or a low budget film can kind of do on its own. I think it does require, well, you could probably do it with a lower budget, but I think you do still require some form of traditional VFX to kind of facilitate what I have in mind, which is, again, like I kind of alluded to earlier, like assisting with inserts, establishing shots, B-roll, and other components of filmmaking where you you end up spending a lot of resources on a very small percentage of the footage that ends up in the film. And I think the way filmmaking works right now is, you spend most of your resources on 90% of your film, which is most of the drama, the dialogue, the medium shots, the wide shots, the close-ups, all of that. But then there's like maybe 5 to 10% of your film that's everything I just said, your B-roll, your inserts, your establishing shots, and all that you end up spending like way too many too much time and resources on, that I think using bespoke AI models or, things like that, to kind of help shrink that both time and budget down would help. So this is just an example. You can kind of do this already, but improvements in this technology would help. I'm going to describe a scenario. Many people have been in this scenario before. You've just filmed a scene. You shot all your coverage, and now you need to get an insert of somebody putting a cup down on a table. So you have all of your crew and all your lights and your camera and the rest of your cast are all on set, just standing around. And all of the production is now just doing nothing while you, the camera, and your one actor, you don't even need the actor, you're just seeing their hand, are spending 15 minutes getting repeated takes of putting a cup down because you're not doing it quite right. It's like you need the timing to be very precise and the placement, and you need to place it just right. And you place it down and you're like, missed it. Or you place it and it's like, oh, it spilled a little bit in a way that I didn't like, or you place it or whatever. Or I'll give you an even better example. Like, you want to get a shot of like flipping a coin and it needs to land just right. And you could spend 20 minutes doing that. And I have, and the entire production just grinds to a halt while you're just repeating this insert over and over and over and over again. Currently, in theory, what you could do is film one take of that action and then do a LiDAR scan of your set, of your table and your prop. And then using the take that you just filmed, your one take, you could run both your LiDAR scan, your 3D scan, a 3D scan of the hand, and the take that you just did, and create, using a bespoke AI model, a video generating model that is designed to just create multiple versions of that shot. So now, instead of spending 20 minutes doing repeated takes of this one shot, you have an AI model that is going to generate repeated takes of this shot for you down the road in post. So that, what I just described, is hypothetically doable, but it requires a VFX workflow because you need some addition. You need 3D tools to do this. And then all of this needs to be done in post. But you just save 20 minutes on set. And that's, if anyone knows how much money goes into a production and is spent and how things compound, those 20 minutes mean you can now move on to your next scene. You get 20 more minutes to go on to your next scene. That's more takes for your next scene. That's more time with your actors getting the meat of your movie instead of spending it on an insert. So that, I know is like a really specific example, but like that, I think that's helpful because that's like something that I could really envision being like a really useful use of a bespoke video generating AI model that can actually make an on-set workflow more efficient.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things. I've also talked to somebody who works a lot in virtual production, running virtual production stages, and what they're now experimenting with is on-set generation of plates for car scenes, which is of course extremely useful because I'm sure you've been there before, where the speed is not quite right or something is 100%. Off with the actual footage that was shot, and then you need it a little bit different, but you can't really change it because that's how the footage is, and the stuff is usually out of focus anyway, so it doesn't really matter. It can be generated, it doesn't need to be perfect, it just needs to be good enough and just be consistent throughout those screens. And I think that's one of the things. If that could be generated on the spot by a VFX technician who's literally prompting what we need, and just be it different, light kind of lighting. It's like if the DP and the director want to change it to more of an evening light from morning or whatever, that should be easily doable with that kind of technology. Whereas in the past, you were kind of stuck with whatever the second unit prepared for those plates, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Let me just to like a little bit of a round of questions before we say goodbye, because there's a bit of an irony in the creator. So I have to go back to the creator, and I'm sure you've been asked about this before, but the creator as a movie in its content asks us to empathize with AI, to see Alfie, the main character, having a soul. But the filmmaking of the movie itself is almost an argument for the irreplaceable nature and the irreplaceable value of human capture. So real light, real locations, real physical struggle, and then VFX, in post put on top of that. Do you see any tension between the movie's themes and how it was made?
What's so funny? Do you know when the first model of ChatGPT came out? Do you remember?
Well, if you ask like that, probably at the same time when The Creator was released.
It was just before, but it was right near the end of when we were filming. Actually, I think it was after we wrapped filming. It was later in 2022. We wrapped filming in June 2022, and then I think ChatGPT was first released to the public in November 2022. So when we made the film, and certainly when it was written, which was many years prior, because the film was written before COVID, the connection to AI as we know it today was not existent. Like, it was not even on our mind. And the irony is that between when we wrapped shooting and then when the film came out, ChatGPT came out. And so suddenly, when the film was released, AI was a buzzy topic in the public consciousness. But when we were even shooting the film, and certainly when it was written, nobody was even thinking about it. And in the context of the film, the AI in it is really just a metaphor for the other, just like it has been used in science fiction in many, many other films. It's they're just sentient robots, androids, like in Star Wars or Blade Runner, replicants, or anything like that. Like, it's not, there was never really intended to be any connection to what we are dealing with now. And of course, the other thing is that I think is important to remember. I think a lot of people tend to anthropomorphize AI nowadays, but I think it's also important to remember that AI right now is a misnomer, because there's no intelligence involved in any of the technology that we're discussing. Diffusion models, generative AI, generative images, large language models, text-based generative models, these are all predictive models. They're not intelligent, and so they're not true AI. They're essentially very sophisticated versions of the predictive text function on your phone when you're typing, and then it pops up like the next word that you're going to write. It's just very sophisticated versions of that technology. So it's not really an intelligence, and I think that it can be a misnomer to watch a film like The Creator or Blade Runner or any of those films where AIs are like sentient beings, because it that's a realm of science fiction that we are nowhere near. And no matter what the Sam Altman-Frieds of the world say about AGI, which is artificial general intelligence, and a truly self-aware sentient AI, we are not close to that. Some people don't believe that's even possible, and I don't know. I'm not a scientist, but the point is that The Creator is fiction, and that the AI and the robots in that movie were meant to be a metaphor, not a literal call to empathize with ChatGPT.
Yeah. It's good what you're saying actually about not being real intelligence. Actually, I read recently that one of the major brains behind this whole AI revolution, his name is a French guy, Yann Lequin. He until recently worked for Meta, but he quit because he said that, and he's a Turing Prize winner, like really top-notch scientist. I think he's probably in his 60s or something. And he said this way that all those companies are going down now with those LLMs is the wrong way, and it's not actually gonna get to where they want to be. This is not the way of doing things, and that's why he actually is now he's saying to all those hundreds of millions of dollars that they're offering him and just starting something new, because he's saying this needs to be different. People don't actually think text. We don't, because all of the stuff we're seeing right now, even the image stuff is purely based on text. So, and he said in order to get to real intelligence, the machine needs to understand images, really understand them. And that's a completely different ball game. And we're not there yet. We just have the illusion of that. It's almost like those, like somebody who is a good talker is not necessarily somebody who's intelligent. And that's exactly what those LLMs are right now. They're very, very good with language and at manipulating language, and then sometimes making images out of that language or even video out of that language, but it's still basically language. And that's why they're not intelligent. They're just, like statistically estimating what is the next word, but they're getting better and better and better at that. And they're fooling us into believing that they're actually intelligent. So
Exactly. I think the key thing to remember is that especially the text-based models, but also the image-based models, are designed to, based on a prompt, repeat back at you or give you back what you want to hear or see. That's what they're designed to do. They're essentially a mirror. They're not intelligent. There's no thought. There's no calculation. It's just a reflection of whatever you put into it, based on an average of all of the data and information that it's been trained on. And that's it. That's how they work. It's actually very simple. Which is not how the human brain works, like you said. And I think one other thing that I thought was really interesting and sobering is that if you look back in history, computer scientists have been predicting and aspiring to create AGI. You know how far back this goes? That people have been saying, oh, AGI is just around the corner. And maybe in 5 years, we'll get to AGI.
Probably decades.
The 1960s. Because that's how far back artificial intelligence research has gone. And ever since then, companies have been promising AGI just around the corner. Every time they want new rounds of funding, AGI is just around the corner. And it's been a long time. So at some point, even though it feels very close now in theory, because a lot of people are saying AGI, I don't know that we're any closer now than we were in 1960.
We'll see. And we should definitely reconnect in, some time, just to see where we stand also with filmmaking and AI, but in general, with all the shifts happening in the filmmaking industry that we talked about. Thank you, Oren. You've been very generous with your time. I think we could go on and talk for hours and hours, but we have to wrap it up now. And I hope we'll see each other again soon.
I hope so too. Yeah. Thanks for the chat. This is great. I hope this is illuminating and interesting and maybe even reassuring to anybody who takes a listen.
Absolutely. And I think it's very inspiring to hear from you that, not all is lost. It's like people stick to your guns and learn creativity and don't get fooled by all those things out there that are distracting us right now, I think.
Thank you for saying that. I think that's probably the key takeaway from all of this is don't get distracted, follow your heart, and just, don't worry about the noise and the distractions in the world. Just pursue your passion and you know what? Sorry, I know we're wrapping up, but I think this is maybe the thing that is the most reassuring to me of all is that we're part of a community and an industry of people who are passionate about making films and telling stories. And I don't think that we're just going to let that go away at the end of the day, and that you can multiply that across every creative industry, music, musicians, and artists and everything. We have an innate need to create and express ourselves. And so people who are passionate about filmmaking and who want to tell stories and make films, nothing's going to stop us, And so all we can do is just keep going and find a way, because that's what artists have done throughout all of history. And that's exactly the same thing now. Like there's always been distractions and all we can do is just keep forging a path forward and keep finding inspiration with each other. So I think that's a really important takeaway.
What a nice way to end this conversation. Thank you so much, Oren. And
all right, thank you.
Thank you. And thanks everybody for watching. You can get CineD Focus Check on Apple Podcasts, Spotify. Leave a comment, give us a good rating. It helps with the reach of the podcast. Of course, also on YouTube. You can also email us at podcast@cined.com if you have any questions or comments. We'll, cover them in one of the upcoming episodes when we go back to more of a news types episode. And yeah, see you next time. Bye.